All right, well, welcome to the McCarthy Center's event, year-end look at the economy. This is, I was counting, this is the 5th time we've been able to do this over the last couple of years. We do one at the end of the fall semester and one at the end of spring. The one in the spring, of course, is not a year-end, but it's kind of a mid-year economic review. The way this works is we're recording this for the air, so occasionally it might seem kind of stilted. The first part of the program, Gary's going to be running things and asking Chris and I questions. Chris and me, see, that's a proper English. Chris and me some questions, and then we're going to open it up to the audience, and we'll have microphones for you guys to ask your questions and get recorded for the broadcast. So we're going to go for about an hour, right, roughly, something like that. And so sit back, think about some questions, and we look forward to having a conversation.
You can be on the radio at noon tomorrow on Minnesota Public Radio. And we'll get a microphone to you to get your questions. All right, let's see here. There we go. Just bear with me for a moment. As Lewis said, it's a little bit stilted, but it'll sound better on the radio this way. Plus, which we need to get everybody seated so they get their beverage, pizza. Excellent. And don't be shy, by the way, if you want to get up during the show and go have a refill. Don't be shy, just go on and do so.
Just buy one for yourself.
Right, one for Gary.
Please don't drink it all.
Is beer good for the economy? Not just bad, people drink more beer?
All right, here we go. Welcome to a special edition of MVR News Presents, coming to you not from some G-rated radio studio or the quiet halls of academia, but from Brother Willie's Pub on the campus of St. John's University in Collegeville. I'm Gary Eichten, former host of the old midday program, and in keeping with our end-of-the-year tradition, economic superstars Lewis Johnston and Chris Farrell are here to report on the state of the economy. We've been doing this for several years now, and along the way we've learned a lot, had a good time doing so, but we have never been in a pub before. Life is good. Lewis, of course, teaches economics here at the College of St. Benedict at St. John's University. He holds the Joseph P. Farry Chair at the McCarthy Center for Public Policy and Civic Engagement. He's written extensively for MinPost over the years. Chris Farrell is Senior Economics Contributor for American Public Media's Marketplace program. He's a regular commentator for Minnesota Public Radio and Wisconsin Public Radio, regular columnist for the Star Tribune and Next Avenue. He's also an author of books, and he now has a podcast titled Unretired. Lewis Johnston, Chris Farrell, distinguished co-chairs of the gone but not forgotten Midday Council of Economic Advisors.
Downhill from there.
Since we've hit the peak already.
All right, let's get started, gentlemen, where we left off last year at this time with your fearless predictions of what was going to happen during 2015. Always a fun exercise. Chris, as the visitor here, you get to bat first. You predicted the Dow Jones 30 Industrials would end this year at 19,000. Instead, the Dow is ending a whole lot closer to 18,000, dare I say 17,500. What went wrong?
Well, a lot of global turbulence happened. A lot of concerns about when is the Fed going to raise interest rates. And also, with the decline in commodity prices and oil prices, which is basically a good thing, but with so many commodity prices down, with fears about what did this mean for China and the other emerging markets. And that really did affect our economy, the expectations for corporate profits, the outlook for economic growth. And so, I was off by a couple percentage points.
Just not fair the way things planned out.
No, it's not. But I would basically blame the emerging markets.
Lewis, if Chris overestimated, you underestimated. You predicted the national unemployment rate would be at 5.7% as we end the year. Instead, much better, only 5%, down almost a full percentage point during the past year. What happened?
Well, two things that were really nice to see happen. One is the U.S. economy grew faster than I expected. I thought that we might bump along with 1%, 1.5% growth, which is what we've been seeing before that. This year, we had a quarter that was over 4%, we've had an annual rate that's over 2%, and the faster the economy is growing, that usually brings along employment in its wake. So that's one thing. The other thing that's been nice to see is that the rate at which people have been able to get jobs, sometimes just called the job finding rate, has been higher than I thought. So people haven't had to go out into the workforce and search quite as long as they were a couple of years ago. So if you put those two things together, the unemployment rate came down a lot faster than I think most of us expected.
But if you live here in Minnesota, you might not feel that way because the job growth in Minnesota has been pretty flat all year.
Well, it's been pretty flat, and it's also because our unemployment rate fell before a lot of other places. So we're bumping around 3% and in that range over the last almost 1 year. So some months it's up a tenth, some months it's down a tenth, but basically we've got a stable labor market for the last year.
And one of the things that we're seeing that we really haven't seen for a long period of time, if you're wandering around, say, the Twin Cities, a lot of "we're hiring" signs are out there. And if you walk into bars and restaurants, not that I walk into bars and restaurants, but if you walk into bars and restaurants and you carry a conversation with the owner, they're really having trouble finding the workers that they need, which is another way of saying they're feeling the pressure to raise their wages. So with this unemployment rate down around 3%, this is really good news for this state.
Well, Chris, you said this time last year that wages would kind of inch up through the course of the year. Have they?
Well, you know, if you really, really want to put on your rose-colored glasses and you look at the last quarter, there's been a little flurry of excitement that for the first time we're starting to see an increase in wages. But the reality is wages have been flat. And in the economy that we're in, hardly anybody still has that confidence where they're going to walk into their boss's office and they're going to say, give me a 5% raise, or I'm walking. Because what they basically believe is the boss is going to say, have a nice walk. And that has not changed. And so we're still an economy, my definition of a good economy is when, not when workers are looking for jobs, but when firms are looking for workers. And we're not there yet. Minnesota is probably the closest in the country toward that state, but we're not even in Minnesota, we're not there yet.
Louis, you were concerned this time last year about whether or not we'd get to a point where everybody was sharing in the wealth, in the growth. Has that happened?
No, unfortunately, economic growth has still been pretty uneven. Part of what you were saying, Chris, is touching on that you're seeing income gains at the top, but not in that middle. There was a new demographic survey that came out today that showed that the number of people who are in the middle class, kind of middle income regions in the United States is now not the majority of people. It's actually dwarfed by the top and the bottom put together. So the middle has actually been shrinking. So unfortunately, no, we haven't seen much progress on that over the last year.
I was really struck by that Pew Research study about the middle class, because it was always said, well, this was one of the great American achievements, to build the middle class. So, everybody basically would have a shot at least, a decent life. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore.
No, it's disturbing because, as you just put it, it's been our national narrative in a lot of ways for the last 100 years, since maybe even 125 years, since we really started mass production and mass consumption going in the late 19th and early 20th century. That's been our mantra, is we're going to build a strong middle class. They're going to have good jobs with stable incomes. They can then buy the products of what's being produced, and we get this virtuous cycle. And over the last 40 years, that virtuous cycle has slowed down and in some cases become a vicious cycle of businesses going out, income being lost, jobs being lost, and the whole thing working in reverse.
Chris?
And I don't know if Louis agrees, but I think part of there are two aspects of this. One is that whole discussion that we've been having in recent years about income inequality and the growth of income inequality, or wealth inequality, or consumption inequality. And that is just really true. And this is something we're going to be dealing with for a long period of time. But the other side of it is we essentially have an economy where this middle class was built on the 40-hour work week with benefits. And that portion of our economy, that portion of our workforce has been shrinking. And yet we've not made adjustments toward that. About a third of the workforce is now contract labor. They don't have a steady job where you work 40 hours a week and you get benefits. And so as our economy has become more diverse, as our population has become more diverse, we have kept the sort of benefit structure and the income structure and the unemployment system structure that was developed for a very different economy. So I think this Pew Research Center study, it feeds into a lot of narratives, but one of the most important narratives is that our economy is changing, the workforce is changing, and we really need to change the way we adjust where we help labor out on retirement, on health care, on unemployment insurance, on workman's compensation, those kinds of things.
What the heck is going to happen on the Iron Ridge? 2,000 people laid off, and there's talk that, you know, it's always been boom and bust on Iron Ridge. But there's some talk that this is a different deal, that in fact a lot of these people are not going to get a job anywhere.
Well, and that's what has been the story, I think, since the late 70s, early 80s. It really has been that industry is slowly, and in some cases it's sudden, but it's disappearing. And we keep thinking, people keep saying, well, it's maybe going to come back, but it's not going to. And I think the question that we're facing is a local version of what Chris was just talking about. What are we going to do to encourage those people to have a decent standard of living? Well, the whole system is set up assuming that they're going to have some kind of lifetime employment in a big company. Or is that going to work? I would argue it's not going to work anymore. We have to set up a system where the health care that they get isn't tied to whether they have a job or not. The pension they're going to get is not tied to whether they've got a job with a particular mining company or not. Because to me, that's driving a lot of the discussion. A lot of the discussion up there is we need to get non-ferrous metal mining, for example, because we've got to get those kinds of jobs back on the Iron Range. Well, okay, how long is that going to last? And we're going to be right back in the same spot again.
So, but also, I mean, look, you are going to get another boom in commodity markets and commodity prices once we get this global economy really growing again. But underlying that, and this is where I think the question about what happens to the Iron Range and what happens to those kind of jobs, you know, as these jobs come back, it's fewer and fewer people are being hired, and it's more and more machinery. And this is where automation and robotics are really going to make a big difference, you know, a palpable difference that you're going to be able to see. So even as the commodity markets return, and we get that boom, because the boom bust cycle in commodities has not been outlawed, and as the emerging markets start growing again, and Europe kind of gets off the dust, you're going to see a little bit of improvement. I think the underlying trend is because of the costs of mining, the costs associated with mining, the demand is going to be more and more automation, more and more technology, and fewer workers, and that is the fundamental underlying problem they're dealing with.
And then the workers that are going to be hired are going to need to be better educated. They're going to need to be higher skilled. So even if you have more jobs back on the Iron Range, they might not be for the people who are there unless they get the training, unless they get the skills that are needed to get those jobs.
How much of the problem of Iron Range can be attributed to illegal dumping of steel products in the U.S. market? Politicians, many of them, say if this is not the whole problem, it's a big piece of the problem.
You know, my knee-jerk reaction is that's typically a fairly small problem. The bigger problem is the high cost of the dollar. I mean, if you're looking at the Iron Range versus Australia, now Australia is a heavily commodity-dependent economy, and yet its miners are holding up much better than ours. And what is the difference? Well, it turns out the Australian dollar has come down, which has cushioned the blow, whereas the U.S. dollar has gone up. And that is where you're getting the cheap steel in. So I would say it's the U.S. dollar policy is having a much bigger impact than that there is a lot of illegal dumping going on.
Lewis?
Yeah, the illegal dumping just isn't that big a deal. Certainly it makes a difference at the margin, as we economists like to say. So, you know, maybe a few hundred jobs here or a couple dozen there, which is clearly important if it's your job or your community's job. I'm not minimizing that, but in the whole scheme of things, in this long-term trend we're talking about, that's not what's causing it. It's the strength of the dollar. And the irony is, it's nice to have a strong dollar. In most ways, it means that people have faith in our financial institutions and things like that. So I know on this first time today, on the one hand, it's really good to have this. It's really good to have this strong dollar. On the other hand, it hurts certain industries like iron ore.
So what the heck is going on with black Minnesotans? the poverty or the unemployment rate for black Minnesotans, 12.4% versus 3.7% for the population as a whole of the state. Poverty rate, much, much higher. 38% of black Minnesotans are said to be living below the poverty line. Now, what the heck is going on here?
So, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, they are the group that has borne the brunt of the things that we're just talking about. So if we go outside the Iron Range and ask what's happened to kind of stable manufacturing jobs that don't require a college degree, that require maybe high school and some skills like that, African Americans, this is also, it shows up when you look at the data on Native Americans who live in urban areas, and other people of color, they're the ones who've lost those jobs. And so we haven't done anything enough to get more employment in those areas that require those kinds of skills.
And I think this is, it's an impact of spatial geographic isolation from a lot of what's going on elsewhere in the economy with poor transportation networks to get there. It is that you have a very young population, a demographically younger population among African Americans. But most of it is that there isn't a lot of industry in their neighborhoods, and where the businesses are, there aren't easy ways to get there. And then it is a long-term impact of being let down, being failed by the education system. And there's a lot of nonprofits and a lot of work going on in African American communities, but frankly, you need a lot more entrepreneurial activity, you need a lot more business creation, and the opportunities are not being there, and it is a disgrace that the unemployment rate is that high.
Would $15 minimum wage, fair scheduling, mandatory sick leave, would that materially help people at the bottom end of the scale?
Yes, overall it would help. The particularly on the wage side, the way that the scheduling I think is extremely important, but I am empathetic to the smaller businesses and how are they going to deal with that. And part of the problem there is I don't think the smaller businesses should have to deal with that. That is something where you spread the risk and the cost through the tax system rather than throwing everything on the small business to deal with. But yes, I think the $15 minimum wage would be good. You have to phase it in order to give businesses time to adjust how they do it. But at the same time, the state needs to step in and improve the earned income tax credit, and the federal government needs to step in and improve the earned income tax credit, because that's a much more efficient way to raise the wages of low-income workers and to broaden it rather than putting all the burden on businesses in order to do it. But it will benefit in this current situation we're in if businesses are given time to adjust to that wage, yes.
Louis?
Well, I think Chris is exactly right for those who have a job, but it doesn't still get at the question that I think you're implicitly asking, which is how do we create employment in these areas? And Chris, I think, touched on that in the earlier answer that he gave to your question, which was, how do we get industry and businesses either to locate nearer to these areas? So I drove up by Plymouth Avenue, for example, where the encampment was a couple of weeks ago. I mean, there's virtually no businesses along there other than a few small grocery stores and hair salons and things like that. There's no places that have long-term job prospects. Why isn't that happening is a question we need to answer. And then if the jobs aren't going to be there, how do we get people to the ones that exist? And it's almost impossible to get anywhere from up there. You have to take a bus, and usually that goes downtown, so you have to go downtown and back out to where you need to go. That needs to be fixed.
And so also part of this, from a national point of view, this is one of the reasons why, and fingers crossed, that we continue to have an economy that continues to expand, continues to grow, you continue to have private sector job growth, which put pressure on businesses to hire more people and then to train people, because the whole thing about hiring people is that you train people, they learn the jobs, and so what the figures that you gave in terms of Minnesota and the African American community, what that really says is, how deep this problem is. And a stronger economy, a 3% unemployment rate, it does help dealing with it.
Federal government, Congress is supposed to come up with a budget this weekend. Should we panic? Is there a reason to be all that concerned about what the federal government does?
Well, there's no reason to panic. I would say no reason to panic. And they're going to come to a deal. I mean, there's a very clear evidence that they're going to come to a deal. It's just a little bit disappointing that this is a big part of your job if you're in Congress and you're paid $175,000 a year, and this is essentially the main thing that you're supposed to be doing, and we're having another one of these cliffhangers and going on. But this, my sense this time, I don't know if you agree, Louis, this is more of a theater, this is more of a dance. The deal is there, it's going to be done, all the incentives are lined up. So from a point of view of good governance, good economic governance that you would hope for, it's a bad sign. From the point of view of should we panic, should we really be worried? No, I wouldn't panic, no, I wouldn't be worried.
Louis?
No, this isn't a replay of the fiscal cliff and all those kind of games of chicken that they were playing. I think there's, as you said, there's already an agreement that, okay, we're not going to shut the government down, we're going to get something worked out. If we have to do a few-day patch to, okay, we'll do that, we won't stop it. But yeah, it really does show that economic policy making in Washington is really broken. It's completely messed up right now. And in 1974, we passed the Budget Act, which supposedly set up a rational system to put together a federal budget over the course of a year and have a committee structure, and we all read it, do all this stuff. It's gone. It just doesn't work, and we need to start over again on that.
And I'll even go farther. If you look back over the last couple of years, and you look at the period where there was all the first time there were threats about default on the federal debt. And at first, you call around, I'd call up people as a journalist, call people like Louis, they'd say, "Look, this is ridiculous, it's never going to happen." And then we came actually really close to it. And that really damaged the economy, and the fiscal cliff really damaged the economy. And so one of the things that has really weighed on this economy and economic growth, and I think this is the real price that many people are paid in terms of their jobs and their income, have been these games that are being played in Washington, D.C. It is having real economic impact. It's not just theater, it's not just fun. If people have lost their jobs, people aren't getting the kind of pay increases, because it's one of the things that's really held back this economy.
Different situation at the state level. State policymakers have $1 billion surplus to play with. This is after they replenish the reserve fund, all that stuff. About $1 billion in St. Paul. What is the best use, from an economic standpoint, best use of that $1 billion? Louis?
To me, the top two priorities would be infrastructure, especially the always sexy and attractive topic of wastewater treatment and sewers and things like that.
That win a lot of votes.
Yeah, well, it's crumbling in Minnesota, and it's actually a serious problem because it's affecting business development. You can't build new plants and new offices if you don't have electrical hookups and sewer hookups and water hookups. And a lot of the towns outside the Twin Cities area or outside of major metro areas like St. Cloud or Duluth or Fargo-Moorhead and those areas, the sewer systems just can't handle it, so you can't get business expansion. And then the other one would get back to your question, which is we need to put money into early childhood education, especially among communities of color.
Yeah, so I would argue, look, this is an opportunity to invest in the fundamentals of economics. So again, echoing Louis, it's infrastructure and it's education, but it's also getting back to what we were talking about. There are real pockets of poverty, African American community in the Twin Cities, but there are parts of rural Minnesota where you have also really a lot of poverty. And so this gives an opportunity to do some selective investments in order to encourage more job creation, more entrepreneurship, in certain troubled sectors of our economy. So I'd be focusing on investments that are going to give you long-term economic growth that really only government can do. And that's what government should be doing when it has this opportunity.
No talk about tax cuts from you gentlemen.
No, I mean, in a sense we were actually, but not the kind of tax cuts that you're hearing out of St. Paul or out of the different offices of the representatives who are going to come to St. Paul. So for example, expanding Minnesota's version of the earned income tax credit would be a really good use of this kind of money, or some kind of tax credit that created incentives to hire underrepresented groups in particular kinds of jobs. But that's not the kind of tax cuts they're talking about. They're talking about either just refund kind of tax cuts or cutting rates at the top, and those things just, to me, just don't make sense.
Chris?
So, in terms of putting on the public policy hat, one of the things I think small business has a lot of things to legitimately complain about. And one of the things is, just the layers and layers of regulation on top of regulation, oftentimes done for good reasons, but then the regulations interact with other regulations. And I think smaller businesses, all businesses have legitimate complaints. So one of the things that government could be doing, for example, in Minneapolis, which is known as Mill City, you're not allowed to mill in the city. And there's some artisans and crafts people who would like to start milling in the city. So, let's take a look at a lot of these laws that are sort of on the books for whatever reason. I don't know what reason that one's on the books for, but whatever reason. And let's strip this away and let's, make the regulatory structure really be far more supportive of job creation. And I really think that you can do a lot on that side of our economy. And that is a bipartisan and should be a bipartisan movement.
And if you think about the cost of doing business, regulations and the time you spend filling out that is probably as important, or in some cases even bigger than having to pay your tax bill or something like that. So to me, that would make a lot of sense to invest in some kind of streamlining of government or electronic, figuring out how to do things electronically that are on paper. Invest some money in that, and that would have a lot of return.
Now, Louis, you mentioned emphasis on spending money on early childhood and so on. How do you pay for that 5 years from now, when the economy is not as strong as it is today?
That's why you have to be careful about the way you set it up. So Governor Dayton, a year ago, and actually even 2 years ago, he talked about expanding early childhood education and making it available to every child under, 4 or 5 or something like that. Now, ideally, that would be really great, but that's where we got to be careful about whether we can afford that over the long term. So I would favor a program that expanded it either through scholarships or through targeted funding to groups that really need it. The ones that we know where the payout would be high, so that even if we got into an economic recession, we still need that investment. It needs to stay there, and it would be in the budget.
And I know we can't do this, and this wouldn't happen, but we have to surplus $1 billion, and I've been completely convinced by the arguments of Art Rolnick, economist, former head of research at the Minneapolis Fed, who's been doing a lot of work, now he's at the University of Minnesota, a lot of work at early childhood education, and to set up a fund with $1 billion. So let's get the wealthy community to put in $250 million, we'll round up the other $750 million, have $1 billion fund for vouchers that go to at-risk kids in the inner city, rural areas, Indian reservations, and at least it would somewhat insulate. You're never completely insulated, but this is in a way that would somewhat insulate the money from the ups and downs of the economy and the sways of the political system.
This is NPR News Presents, coming to you from Brother Willie's Pub here at St. John's University of Collegeville. I'm Gary Eichten. We're assessing the state of the economy at year's end with our guests, longtime favorites, Louis Johnston, who is a professor of economics at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University, and Chris Farrell, American Public Media economics contributor, columnist, author, and now podcaster. Time for audience questions. Just raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. Meanwhile, while we're getting that set up, gentlemen, as I understand it, the Federal Reserve next week will finally raise interest rates.
Just waiting for you to
Is that true? And what difference is that going to make to the average person?
Well, they're going to do it. I mean, I think they've gotten to the point now where they almost have to do it. It's been built into everybody's expectations. For the average person, it probably won't make much difference at all because it's been built into so many forecasts that banks have already built it into what they're charging their customers. It's probably not going to affect adjustable rate mortgages in any significant way. So for the average person, probably not much difference.
Chris?
For the average person, I think this is actually a reminder. I don't know if we really need a reminder, but it's a reminder about how vulnerable our finances to outside forces. So you and I, we have no control over what the Federal Reserve is going to do. We don't know what interest rates are going to do. I mean, they hike.
I thought that they called you guys for
Well, if they obviously not listen to me because I would have told, Chairperson not to raise rates, but she's not listening to me. So they're going to do this action. It's a reminder how vulnerable our finances are to outside forces. So it's a good time, and also we're at the end of the year, beginning of a new year, to be thinking about the fundamentals, the things that you can control in terms of saving and in budgeting and giving. So that would be my main message. That's the real reminder here, because by the way, they start raising the rate once, they're going to raise it twice, they're going to raise it 3 times. We don't know where is the peak, but my guess is it's going to be several moves, and they are going to raise interest rates, and they're desperate to get the inflation rate back up to 2%. So you start adding it all up together. What this kind of says to me is this is a little bit of a sea change in the economy. Take advantage of this moment to just make sure if your finances are vulnerable or where they're vulnerable, start showing it up.
I want to get to audience questions, but a quick one here, a follow-up if I may. Would you explain in layman's terms why the Federal Reserve is so hung up on raising the inflation rate to 2%? Seems like 0 is better, or what the heck, let's go 3.
Well, there, you put your finger on one of the great mysteries. Back in the 1980s and 1990s, when people started talking about this phenomenon called inflation targeting, everybody was asking, well, what should the number be? And we seem to have settled on 2%, but when you really dig down deep, there's no reason why 2 is the right number. It might as well be 3, or it might as well be 4, or it might as well be 0. So there isn't a right number. That's the problem.
So, and just to add to that, because you're absolutely right, I think part of it is they've used that number for so long, why change it? Because there's not any really good reason to change it. And they have this sort of story, which is kind of a convincing story. I don't think it holds up very well. But at 2%, it's kind of an inflation lubricant to the economy. It just makes it easier for things to work. And at 2%, your interest rate should be, your long-term interest rate should be around 4%. So that gives them a little room to cut rates. So it's like, I'm comfortable with that number, so let's just stick with it.
But it's the devil we know.
Raise your hand if you've got a question. I have another one here. New Minneapolis Federal Reserve President Neil Kashkari was in charge of the TARP bank bailout, the much
Unfairly
maligned, unfairly maligned, more of a political actor than maybe a lot of the other guys have been. Is he a good choice?
Well, see, I think it's a really interesting choice. I really do. I mean,
Does this
he's
matter
smart.
to
The thing that I really like, and part of this depends, some people hate this, I like this, he's not an economist. Actually, he comes out of engineering. Sorry, Louis. He's not an economist. He has an engineering background. He has a finance background. So I think he's going to add, and he has a lot of experience in government on the fiscal side. So I actually think he's really going to add an element to the discussions when he's involved in the Federal Reserve discussions. So I'm actually looking forward to this.
Well, I actually think he is an interesting choice, is a good way to put it. That he'll bring a new perspective to the position. I'm not so upset that he's not an economist. I guess I would have liked an economist, but my only question is this, does he see this as a long-term position? Because I have this sneaking suspicion that this is a stepping stone to something else. And the reason I keep thinking this is I remember Tim Geithner. Tim Geithner was president of the New York Federal Reserve, and in a sense he was the Treasury Secretary in waiting for the next Democratic administration. And in a sense, is that where Neil Kashkari is he kind of a Treasury Secretary in waiting for the next Republican administration? That's all right, but I kind of like him to stick around a while.
All right, let's go to the audience. Question down here, please.
Hello, thank you all for coming. The College of St. Benjamin St. John's University just had a team of students go to the UNFCCC, so the big climate change conference happening right now in Paris. And especially with the top of the Iron Range, a couple of us that are in attendance today, we were just wondering, what does it look like in Minnesota if we really took the initiative to facilitate the transition to renewable energy, especially for job growth, but also for our economy as a state, but even maybe the larger U.S.
All right.
I actually think it would be a great thing to do because there's so many technological advances now that are coming together to promote clean energy that if we were to be at the leading edge of that, we could actually be developing some of the first movers, or if not first movers, companies that are riding that first mover wave of, especially I'm thinking of solar power. That seems to be one, and wind too, but solar especially seems to be one where we can take advantage of that. So I actually think that would be a great way to go, and if we could set that up in the Iron Range, obviously that would be nice, but it's notoriously difficult to use government policy to attract those kinds of things. So I would prefer to see more general policies like a carbon tax or something like that in order to get the price of carbon-based fuels adjusted in such a way that there were no things distorting it and making carbon-based fuels seem cheaper than they really are. That would help more than anything.
Yeah, I think one of the things coming off of this is, I mean, there's only so much a state can do, so it absolutely echoes that. On the national level, a carbon tax is just incredibly important. But on the state level, it's really thinking about sustainability as innovation. So for a lot of companies, sustainability is a way of lowering their costs. And for other companies or other divisions within a company, sustainability is a new market. It's a new possibility. And we have been stunned, actually, by how fast the price of solar has been falling, just as one example. So I think it's sometimes this conversation, and I know you're not saying this, but it has this sense of hair-shirt denial. We're going to be living in caves, and it's going to be really dark, and we're going to be really cold, and it's really cold in Minnesota, but it's going to be okay. And instead, I think this is an incredible opportunity to seize. And because this is a state that is unusually well educated, and it does have a competitive advantage in a well-diversified economy, and with a really strong agricultural sector. So one of the sectors that I'd be looking for in terms of opportunity with sustainability is in our agricultural sector. I don't think we're actually there right now, but I think that conversation is going on, and that is an incredible opportunity to seize, which would then create jobs, which would create wealth.
The unemployed taconite miner on the range, how does he benefit from any of this?
Well, you know, the thing with the only way the unemployed taconite worker is going to benefit from this is, one, retraining, which is going to work for some, and the other is spillovers, because when you're talking about innovation or jobs, right? There's lots of other businesses that get created that service that on the construction side of the business, in the supply side of the business, the supply chains. And so there are lots of job opportunities that surround the innovation, and we so much have this image that the only people that can benefit from innovation have a graduate degree, or at least a BA, and they're really good at STEM, and they really know how to code, and they're like incredibly sophisticated with computers. And what we forget is, yes, that's a relatively small group of people going to benefit, and they do really well. But if you have this vibrant innovation going on and vibrant creation, the spillover effects in restaurants and in bars and construction and supply chains is incredible. And that's what you really want to have. And that's where the taconite worker is going to benefit.
Question down here, please.
My former employer, Norfolk Southern Railroad, is being bought out by Canadian Pacific. I also noticed that the company that makes my beer is now owned by a European company. I'm also seeing increases in the prices of basic commodities like sugar and flour and beer, which makes me upset. What's going on here with the American dollar? Is the American dollar at a point where, is it weak to the point where foreign companies can buy our corporations, but we can't even afford to buy our own beer?
So there's a couple of things that are going on. On a relative basis, the dollar is actually pretty strong. That's what's been hurting a lot of our manufacturing. But we have enormous consolidation that's going on in a number of industries. And one of the most disturbing aspects of our economy is, if you look at a lot of big companies, they have made some kind of decision not to invest in capital equipment or even in innovation, but to invest in consolidation, and also to invest in lowering their tax bill and the tax and getting the sort of efficiencies that come from consolidation, and you can put those efficiencies in quotes. And there's also a sense that the Justice Department, until just recently, the Justice Department has kind of blessed a lot of mergers. And so there is this sort of question, has consolidation gone too far? Have the mergers and acquisitions gone too far? It's part of a global economy, you would kind of expect it. It's also a very defensive thing. We mentioned that in terms of the big breweries that are combining. Well, that's because they're afraid of the craft beers. and they're losing market share to the craft beers. So rather than invest in growth, what they're doing is they're consolidating and trying to defend their position.
Question down here, please.
Well, one of the big things that came out of Congress, not this week, but last, was the Transportation and Housing and Urban Development Bill. I was wondering, since that had included 5 years of funding to secure projects for states, as well as, well, without touching the gas tax, additionally, it also removes the Export-Import Bank. And I'm not sure whether or not the crude oil ban was lifted, but I was wondering if there's any chance that this would be able to pass the president's desk, and what that would mean economically for the nation.
Louis?
Well, it actually did pass, and I think it's waiting for his signature, if I remember right. So it did get through, and I think that's going to help in a lot of ways. A lot of state transportation departments have been operating on this 6-month or 1 year if in a great environment planning stage. So they couldn't say, all right, we're going to start this project and we know we're going to have 3 to 5 years of funding on it if we can get it done. So you can kind of see this in some of the construction projects around Minnesota. You've seen these small little pieces done that eventually turn into something bigger instead of making sure that you get many miles of interstate, for example, all rehabilitated at once. So it's going to help that way. I also think it's going to help the private sector because when we talk about infrastructure building, we're really talking about the private sector. The government is spending the money, but it's going into the coffers of private construction companies, private contractors, and so it's going to help that part of the private sector as well. They're going to have some stability in terms of, all right, we have these contracts that are going to last this long, we can hire people for this long. Maybe if somebody wants to walk, we will keep them. After all, if they ask for $15 or ask for a raise or something like that. So it comes back to Chris's earlier point about uncertainty. It reduces the uncertainty of the business environment significantly.
But it's also a sign of how low our expectations have become.
Yeah.
Because we're actually applauding this because it's a 5-year time horizon and actually something's going to happen. But if you talk to most analysts, and that doesn't matter whether they're conservative or liberal or mainstream, they're all basically going to agree that this is a patchwork quilt, and that we're living in an environment of really low interest rates where capital is really cheap, and if you raise that gas tax and you had a stronger stream of income, there's actually a lot. You could seize this opportunity to do a lot on infrastructure, but this is about as good as we can get in the current environment, and so we're applauding it, whereas in a different era, we would say don't bother.
To the back of the room, please.
Would you comment, please, on the trend of more and more large corporations moving their headquarters to low-tax countries?
Chris?
Yes, so this is what typically goes under the term corporate inversion. People hear corporate inversion. So if you look at one of the recents when Pfizer is going to merge the $160 billion merger with Allergan, Ireland, Allergan's effective tax rate in Ireland is 5%, and Pfizer's effective tax rate in the U.S. is 26%. And so that is driving a lot of these deals. Technically, the Pfizer-Allergan isn't a corporate inversion, but it's essentially if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it is a duck. I think that this, what this has done is exposed why we need tax reform in the corporate side. We need tax reform, by the way, on our side, the individual income tax. But we really need tax reform on the corporate side. And it's incredibly difficult because what happens is we over several years, like in 2004, we put in these various patchwork quilt sort of solutions to solve it. And for example, they made us the solution sounded brilliant. If you're going to do one of these corporate inversions, you're going to take advantage of lower tax rates overseas, then the corporate officers, the senior officers, they're going to have to pay taxes on their stock options and everything else like that. Great, that's a disincentive, right? So what the board of directors have been doing is that they've either been accelerating the payments on their stock options and various bonuses, or they've been just making it up on the back end so that they really don't lose anything. It doesn't work. So that's why I'm in the camp that we need more fundamental tax reform. And the real risk there is the U.S. has the highest corporate tax rate in the world, 35%. It's not a big deal because most big companies don't pay that. And so the standard argument is, lower that tax rate, and then you get rid of deductions and credits. The problem is every deduction and credit, for oftentimes good reasons, has somebody that's benefiting from it. So what often happens is you start out lowering the tax rate, but you keep the deductions and the credits. And that's going to cause real problems on the fiscal side. So this is an easy thing, but I guess this would be the canary in the coal mine that says, yes, we really do have to grapple with corporate tax reform.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same problem that we were talking about earlier with the structure of our economy is changing so much, and yet we have an unemployment system and a health insurance system and a pension system that's built for an economy that's composed of big corporations that are all based in the United States and do primarily their work in the United States. We've got a tax code that's set up the same way and doesn't recognize that, you know, whether a company has its headquarters in Dublin or Minneapolis, they're going to be doing the same thing. So we've got to have a tax code that recognizes that. I have a pretty radical proposal for this that would fall on deaf ears, I think, on both sides of the aisle in Congress. But one possible way to deal with this is just eliminate the corporate income tax entirely and raise the individual income tax rate and make sure that what's being earned, because it eventually has to come into the pockets of somebody in the United States. It's going to pass through the corporation into the CEO's salary, to a worker's salary. Why not get a more progressive tax system so that if you really want to get that money out of the higher earning people at the top in the corporate hierarchy, don't try and extract it out of the company, go straight to the source and get it out of them. But I think I'd get maybe Bernie Sanders' vote, and I don't know who else in the Senate.
Well, I think what happened is, I think it's a great idea. It's really, truly is a great idea. But what happened is they get rid of the corporate income tax and not raise the individual.
Right, and then we have even bigger budget deficits.
All right, what about student loan debt? What in the heck can be done about that? There are a good many students, I imagine, at St. Ben's and St. John's who are in hock up to their neck. And you know, the future is not bright when you're that indebted.
Well, we hope they're not, for one thing. We hope that we're trying to do good financial aid packages and things like that. But I'm of two minds about the student debt problem. One is that it's not a big deal in the sense that if you look at who's mostly affected by it, the problem is mostly located with people who go to for-profit schools, take out large loans, and then don't finish. That seems to be where the most desperate problem is, because then you've taken out the debt and you don't have any earnings capacity to pay it back. So that's a big problem. The other problem, though, is the one that I think afflicts us here and at places like University of Minnesota and things like that, and that is that we've taken this attitude towards higher education, and I'd like to hear what you think about this too, Chris, is that that the returns to education primarily go to the person going to school, and that society doesn't benefit very much. So since you're the one who's going to get the returns, you might as well take the risk of taking out the loans. And I think there are social benefits, a lot of them, to education. And so there's a place for government subsidizing higher education. And so that would make a lot more sense to put more resources into higher education in order to reap those social benefits.
Chris?
So I think it's really clear that we have a student loan system, we have this financial aid system that relies too much on loans. And if you go back to the early 1990s, you know, if you look closely at the data, you can kind of see student loans, but there weren't very many student loans. That was back in the era more of work study and grants. And so there was this idea, as Lewis was saying, about, you know, people should have a little more skin in the game because they're going to reap all these benefits. Not a bad argument, but we have gone way too far. We have a system that relies too much on loans. And we also have a financial aid system that makes the individual income tax system look good. And it is an absolute disgrace and impediment to many low-income families going to college. And this is, you know, it's just too complicated a system. So I think, you know, for most students, you want to do an income repayment, a contingent income repayment plan, pay out of your income depending on what it is. And that's probably the way that we need to go. But it is, as a society, we need to support the students more. And yet, at the same time, we don't want to throw everybody into one bucket, which is, when you hear these numbers like 100,000, 200,000, that's actually a very small percentage. And when you look at the people who are really borrowing a lot of money that they're never going to be able to pay back, that is in the for-profit industry. And that is an absolute disgrace. And that is an industry that's spent a fortune lobbying on Capitol Hill. And it is being protected politically. So we have two issues to deal with. One is the for-profit issue. And then the second issue is a student loan system that is run amok.
Not a lot of time left, but let's get another audience question on it.
Why hasn't the significant decrease in commodity prices resulted in increase in consumer spending? We've had significant decreases in foodstuffs, fuel, and that should put more money into the pocket of the average consumer, but there hasn't been any increase in spending.
Yeah, this is one of those sort of puzzles that's out there, because I mean, if I had told you that oil prices were going to, fall the way that they have fallen, you'd be going, we're growing at 8%, all right, maybe 6%, but we would be just growing really fast. So when people have been looking at the numbers, there are two things that are going. One, actually people have increased their savings. So some of it is going into savings, and spending is held up more than you would think relative to the strength of the economy. So consumer spending is held up. So it is having some impact. But I think what it is this, and this is my suspicion, I don't have any really proof, but I think this is one of those times where we're living in a global economy, and we're really aware that we're in a global economy. So it's helping the U.S. It really is helping the U.S. consumer. But the emerging markets like Brazil and China are having all kinds of problems. Europe is really on its back, and it's not getting that much of a benefit. So the U.S. economy is the strongest economy in the world, which is not a good thing, because we're only growing a little bit over 2%. I think that the lower oil prices has helped support this economy, but it's only because how poor the rest of the world is doing that we're not appreciating it enough.
It also comes back to the sustainability question that we had earlier as well, is that if you look at the word economists like to use is elasticity, the sensitivity of something to a change in oil prices. The U.S. economy's gotten a lot less sensitive to movements around in oil prices and gasoline. So for example, if you have a fuel-efficient car, swings in gas prices aren't going to change very much how much you budget for fuel over the course of a month. So you're not going to be able to either increase your spending in response to a big dip in gas prices, and you're not going to cut back very much in response to I said that backwards, but you know what I mean. So it's a fluctuations. And on the other hand, so we'll start that again. But that's, I think, one of the big things that's going on is that we're just a less energy-intensive economy than we were before, and so movements in those kinds of commodity prices don't end up having the effects that they used to.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Actually, just right. And the other effect is one effect of fracking, whatever you think about fracking, is that it was a huge spur toward capital investment in this economy. And there's been a lot of concerns as that has been reduced, which because of the lower oil prices, that is having a negative spillover, sort of a downward spillover effect on our economy, because they were really doing a lot of the investment.
2016 is an election year. What would you ask the presidential candidates if you had the chance? Chris.
So I would ask, God, I have so many things that I would ask them. Let me just ask
You only get one.
Only get one. So I'm going to ask a really basic question. Really basic question. We've had this national discussion for the past 3 decades about the aging of the population and retirement and the lack of retirement savings. And during the first Clinton administration, they came out with, some really good ideas about how to have a universal retirement savings plan. And then in the Bush administration, they came up with some really good ideas to have a universal retirement savings plan. And in the Obama administration, they came out with some really good ideas. And so basically, if you think that people would have retirement savings easily done, that is going to lower the draw on the public purse, and people will have more freedom of choice later in life. So why, Mr. President-to-be, or Mrs. President-to-be, why don't we have a universal retirement savings plan when we got lots of good ones? I mean, there's really not much dispute there. There's, a lot of economists have sold off on this. A lot of the people ahead of, Putnam and the other mutual fund, Fidelity, they bought into this. So why aren't you doing it? It would help people out.
Lewis?
I would go to the globalization question. I'd say, and again, Mr. President, Mrs. President, whichever you're going to be, you know, you can move money at the push of a button. We can move capital anywhere in the world, and yet people have a terrible time moving. We have a migration crisis in Europe. We've got demagoguery over immigration going on in the United States. What are you going to do to actually spend some political capital and get the immigration system set up in such a way so that the people who want to come to the United States, who are going to be such tremendous boons to our human capital and not to mention to our cultural capital, so they can come here, form families, buy houses, get jobs, do the things that all of us want to do, and make that so that it's not a life or death decision just to get across the border.
Economic outlook for 2016, Lewis, Johnston, is your thumb up or down?
It's up, but it might be shaking a little bit, and it's because it's so dependent on what happens in the rest of the world. Right now, the U.S. economy is more connected than it's ever been, and if Europe gets a cold or if China gets the flu, we might catch it too.
Chris Farrell, your thumb?
My thumb is up, and it's a strong thumbs up. I think that, you know,
Like last year at this
I
time.
know. Well, you know, Roger Epson forecast the 1929 crash. He went down as a legend. Now, it does turn out they've been forecasting it 12 years in a row, but everyone remembers the forecast that they got right. So I'm going for the economy is going to be stronger.
How high will the Dow rise then at this time next year, Chris?
Well, you know, I kind of learned that old lesson. What was it?
I need a number. I need a number here.
Sandra Goldman said, you know, never make predictions, especially about the future. So, but I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm just going to say that we'll be at 18.8.
18.8, so it'll be up about 1,000
Yeah.
bucks. And Lewis, the national unemployment rate at this time next year will be, it's 5% right now.
I think it'll still be about 5% next year. I don't think it's going to sink very much.
And the Minnesota rate is 3.7 right now.
It might actually click up a little bit, simply because the economy's bumping around on the bottom the way it is.
All right, strong thumb up and a shaky thumb up. All right, we're out of time, but thanks so much for joining us. Our guest, American Public Media's economics contributor, Chris Farrell, and our host, St. John's and St. Ben's economics professor, Lewis Johnston. From Brother Willie's Pub at St. John's University, I'm Gary Hutt.